Hello, everybody. This is Scott Nelson from the Austrian Economic Center located in Vienna, Austria. So to conclude this day's session of Free Market Roadshow family state of the country or state of the region sort of meetings, I'm joined by Ivan Jovetic, who is professor of economics at the University of Donja Gorica since 2007. And in addition to his many other activities, he's an entrepreneur and has been working in his family business since 2006. Welcome, Ivan.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be part of any activities done by Austrian Economic Center and Free Market Roadshow. So it's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you to be here virtually, as it were. So I'm not sure if you're, going to speak mainly about Montenegro or about the Balkans in general when it comes to the coronavirus. Obviously, right now, in the newspapers, everybody's looking mainly at, New York, Spain, and Italy. And so it'll be very interesting to hear what is going on in your part of the world. And so maybe if you could just start off by giving us just a brief kind of overview, what's the current state of affairs there in terms of numbers of infected roughly? Have there been any deaths or anything? Is everyone in quarantine? What's going on?
So basically, I will put it in a perspective, like you said, of Montenegro and partially the region, and I will also give, let's say, at least one comment about the global issues. When it comes to Montenegro, I think that the government and the national coordination team did a good job so far. Maybe some of us wanted to have certain measures slightly before than we had it, but sometimes it's an assumption and projection of people that are directly involved in the issue. So at this moment, we are, let's say, in the stay-at-home movement. So it's a request for at least majority of us to stay at homes. It doesn't relate it to the services that must work, including media and including health workers, of course, and some other sectors, but the situation is like that for the past almost 2 weeks. Before that, UDG was again a pioneer in making a decision, because a week before that we stopped all our teaching classes and all our on-site business activities, because we thought it's a socially and personally responsible measure. We converted since last week all activities online. So all the teaching is being done online. Actually, this week is a so-called free week for the students and the lecturers in the context of giving lectures, but it's also a very important preparation week for the following period, because we are preparing that we will finish the academic year in online mode. And maybe this will also give us and show us some of our strengths and abilities to pivot and adapt to these black swan situations. When it comes to Montenegro, in addition, one small municipality which has 15,000 inhabitants is fully quarantined, because it has the highest percentage, in absolute terms, highest percentage of infected people. Former travelers are in quarantine, and a lot of people is in so-called self-isolation. Roughly 6,500 people is under the health surveillance, is within the health surveillance process. Flights have been cancelled, borders are closed, only Montenegrin citizens and holders of permanent residencies can enter the country, but when they enter, they're obliged to go to the 14 days quarantine mode, and borders are open only for trade, medical aid, delivery, and things like that. So no individual and traveling traffic. It's completely forbidden. And mobility within the country is also reduced since 3 days ago. It's also forbidden that we travel between two cities or two towns or two municipalities, whatever. And it is also requested to have physical distance, so only two people, two persons can be together on the public surfaces, and the distance between two of them must be at least 2 meters. So I think that those measures are quite good. Maybe they should have been introduced a week before, but we are where we are. At this moment, we have recorded 70 persons infected with the virus, and unfortunately, one person died a few days ago. But if the things remain like that, I can say that we will be quite lucky because such numbers are still, despite the unfortunate fact that someone died, are really non-comparable to some other countries. And I'm honestly hoping that the situation will be fine, but we need to understand that things like this can happen in the future again, and we must prepare ourselves for something that will not be a black swan situation in the future. It will be relatively ordinary, or not going to be a scientific revolution. It will be so-called normal science, to use Kuhn's reference.
Um, I mean, God forbid the situation should get any worse there. But if it were to get worse, I mean, what's the state of the health system there? I mean, are hospitals, able to accommodate an increase in the number of people infected, or what does that look like?
It of course depends on a potential number of infected, and I'm also hoping that that number will never be so high. We have a mixed hospital medical system in the country, public and private hospitals, but in general, and also in this situation in particular, public hospitals are prevailing the whole situation. The officials are claiming that there are enough capacities, but again, it's also always correlated with the number of potentially infected or really infected. What I strongly hope is that we will never be in a position to validate the claims from the officials. So, because we had a situation that we didn't have a lot of ventilators or respirators, depends how someone calls them. We now have a certain number, but again, in the situation of expansion of this issue, we don't have enough. But the good thing is we have a substantial amount of donations from the private companies in Montenegro for the past. Because we need to know that this is a small country. For the past couple of days, the amount donated by the private companies and individuals is roughly 3.5 million. The EU has donated 3 million to the direct assistance to the healthcare sector, plus it is planned an additional 50 million from current funds for pre-accession that will be just restructured and redistributed, and that 50 million will be delivered to the health sector, but also to entrepreneurs and businesses, companies as a direct assistance.
Actually, yeah, that's good. That's a good segue into the next bit here. I mean, so moving from the health issue to more the economy. I mean, what is the state of the economy right now when it comes to unemployment or layoffs, or are there businesses, small businesses being forced to close and that sort of thing? And then, of course, to follow up on what you just ended on there, I mean, yeah, what are the measures the government is taking in terms of what tax deferrals or that sort of thing?
Even before this situation, we have had relatively high unemployment and high unemployment within the youth, but those percentages were declining, which was a good trend. But at this moment, the government dedicated through Investment Development Fund 102 million euros, which are dedicated as a specific credit line with the 1.5% interest rate and 2 years grace period and the payback period of plus six years, so in total 8 years, which will be mainly directed to the healthcare companies, medical supply companies, hospitality and tourism companies, food production, and so on. As I said, there is also actually will be this contribution from the European Union of 50 million euros to what I already said sectors. Then a third measure is partial delay of tax obligations and partial delay of bank loans payments. At the moment, there are no layoffs, there are no bankruptcies at the moment, but depending on the let's say, the health of the companies and their ability to apply for these very favorable loans from the investment development fund, it will be also dependent how many people will stay at their jobs, because one of the issues from this credit line is to take a credit in order to pay the salaries to your workers in at least next 90 days. One of the key problems is that we are uh, dominantly tourism country. Tourism is roughly 25% of GDP in Montenegro. Uh, then hospitality and restaurant sector are not, they're vivid, but the margins are not that high. So the retained profit so far is not that high, and it's not enabling them to be peaceful and cope with the situation. Then it is also directly linked to two things: to fear of what might happen, but unfortunately, this part of the world has suffered many different turmoils, starting from wars, UN sanctions, and etc. Several crises, and survived. So hopefully, economy will survive again. But the fear is present. It is really tricky at the moment, because economy is not on the agenda fully yet, because there is a fear, there is a health is a dominant topic on the agenda, which is completely normal, but economy will come. At this moment, I told you that almost none of small businesses are working, so they're permanently closed. And second, economic forecast will also depend on what will happen with let's say, other countries, because if situation in certain markets remains really heavy, then we cannot expect any kind of inflow of tourists in Montenegro or any other Balkan country. At the moment, only technology sector, construction sector, food retail, and health and medicine sector are fully operating. So if you put it in another perspective, one of the we are witnessing that one of the, let's say, indicators of economic situation in the developed countries are stock exchanges. In case of Montenegro, that cannot be the case in at least two reasons. The market is relatively shallow and not fully, unfortunately, developed. It was in certain period, it was exceptionally high, and I believe that maybe not such figures and such returns can return, but I believe that some issues, of course, can return, and some positive trends can return. Current situation at the market, there are two indexes on the Montenegro Stock Exchange. One is called MSI 10, with the 10 biggest company trading. His week-to-week change was roughly minus 0.42%. His month-to-month change was around 0.16. When it comes to other Monex index, week-to-week change was negative 0.42. Month-to-month was negative 0.11. So when you put that in perspective, it's probably not related to the corona or COVID-19 issue. It's more related to, let's say, issues on the market itself. And I cannot correlate the situation in the market with situation in a real economy.
Fair enough. And how are you mentioned, a lot of fear, for example, that people are feeling. I mean, how are people reacting in general just to the quarantine? I mean, are they also afraid of the economic consequences and what could happen in the future?
Well, reaction in general was partially relaxed. We were not so responsible at the very beginning. Now I think we are much more responsible. I'm advocating the issue through my media role, that media should not talk about economic consequences and fear of economic consequences, but must talk about the potential measures and potential activities that should be done now and in the next following months. So people are somewhere in between, to put it in that context, maybe still not fully aware. But of course, there are voices on the public stage that economic consequences will be rough.
Okay, fair enough. And of course, the $64,000 question, which I'm putting to everyone at the very end, the sort of thing that everyone wants to kind of know about and no one can really answer, namely, what do you see though moving forward? Do you have any predictions moving forward in terms of will the Montenegro or the region as a whole undergo a quick recovery after the crisis, or what are the things that anyone who's watching the Balkans right now, what should we be looking out for right now?
Well, it is $1 million question or $1 billion question, of course. But the key problem here is that the answer to that question is a combination of fear that exists here and on the foreign markets, but also of the trends from the foreign markets. Because we are heavily dependent country, our main economic sectors, tourism, agriculture, including wine production, aluminum, are all heavily export oriented. So we are very globalized, let's put it that way. But unfortunately, we are not globalized as some of us wanted to be. In 2007, Professor Vukotic led ISSP team that made an economic reform agenda that was, let's say, the outcome of the concept of Montenegro as a microstate. And that concept was unfortunately rejected by the government, and I really think it was a huge mistake. But that concept was positioning Montenegro as a society and as a hub for the region, with a very limited government, with a very open society, but also as a potential hub for the world companies to deal with something that we have here, and it is a 25 million region market that speaks with more or less the same language. Right. So if you ask me what any investor should look at Montenegro in particular at this moment, is to think about it in a post-crisis context, and to think about it as a potential hub to work with Western Balkans. Why? Because yes, we still have a far way to go to become let's say a developed economy, or economy that ended up with the transition process, of course. But you know, the early adopters are always having a highest, or should always have a highest revenue at the very end. So basically, but that might be also another point, but I will tell it now. As Harari mentioned, is one of his articles related to coronavirus, is we lack trust at the global scale, which we should find a way to reduce it. Second, closing the borders will not solve the issues. So I think if coronavirus brought anything good, it is let's say indicator that nation states cannot live isolated and cannot solve the problems isolated. So the way to prevent such things in the future is definitely to share, like he said, scientific information globally, and to have a context of global solidarity, but of course a context of global cooperation, which does not include only so-called nation states at the moment.
I think that that sort of message of post-corona global solidarity and optimism is a wonderful place to conclude.
Definitely.
So, thank you very much, Ivan Jovetic. Ivan Jovetic is Professor of Economics at the University of Donja Gorica and an entrepreneur. So thanks once again for your time, Ivan.
Thank you very much, and thank you again for inviting me. It was my real pleasure.
Mine as well. Take care.
All the best. Cheers.